Hello everyone, once again another deck profile on a deck that I have not updated for a while until now. This time on the Gravidia deck, or in this case it's Nordlinger Masques, because Gravidia Nordlinger didn't get herself a new form, or technically an upgrade of a new grade 3 for the ride deck, but we did get Masques a while back, and that Masque unit was kind of bad, but with recent support it actually got a little bit better for a fun deck. In fact, this deck used to be one of the better decks when it was first released, but over time it got power crapped over time. But even now, it's still a fun deck to play just because of its playstyle. And also, design aesthetic just looks pretty cool because I love the alien dragon looking design. She just looks very cool. But other than that, there's really not much to say about it other than it's just a fun deck that uses a lot of set orders. And here is already one weakness of the deck. The fact that you have to run a lot of set orders, aka zero shields. So you're going to be losing a lot of defense in this deck, meaning that this deck is going to be more so full on offense. And another thing is because if you're playing Masque, obviously Masque is going to clog up some of your grade 3 lineups as well, which is going to also basically be more zero shields. But the upside is that this deck has quite a good amount of offense, aka it could be very brutal to your opponent with basically a huge nuke, and that is very strong about this deck. But anyway, let's just begin with the deck profile with, of course, the ride deck. So first off, we're gonna go with, of course, the ride line with Gravidia Delin. You can choose whichever one you want with this deck because it's not actually restricted, but I just like to choose archetype reasons. In which I go to Gravidia Wells. I see many people liking to play the Cardinal ride line and then just use Gravidia Nordlinger as the grade 3, but personally I prefer just going archetype. So, on placed on Vanguard, look at top 7 cards of your deck to choose as many meteorites from the top 7 and put them all to your hand. Yes, you could plus 7 out of this. It is actually possible. The likely chances of that happening is not very high, but the most amount I usually get is around 2. Either way, it sets you up. And the second skill, which is a unique skill where your Vanguard's Nordlinger, you can Soul Blast 1 to choose up to 2 meteorites from your hand and put them into your order zone. And of course, plus 2k power. You don't use it for the second skill because it's not in the main deck, but you can do it if you wish. You mainly use it just for the meteorite search. In which we go to the grade 2, Gravidia Boringer, where on place on Vanguard or Rearguard, you can Soul Blast 3 while you have a meteorite in your order zone to draw a card and plus 5k power. And the second skill just lets you get plus 5k power if you have a total of 5 meteors from your order and drop zone. If you're wondering how you're going to get 3 soul when you're riding on grade 2, the meteorite is going to explain that. Of course, this is just for some extra plus engine, doesn't really do much. In which we go to Gravidia Nordlinger, which is actually still not too bad till this day, actually. Because on place on Vanguard, search your deck for up to 2 meteorites and put them to your order zone and shuffle your deck. This part is actually going to be very helpful because 1, it extends your meteor count in your order zone, and 2, it's going to activate some additional skills from one of your meteorites, which is going to be very key. But the second skill, which is the main skill where on attack you can counter blast 1, put as many meteorites from your order zone to the drop, and depending on the amount that you put, it gets these skills. So you put at least 1 plus 15k, put at least 3, crit plus 1, and you put at least 5, trigger effects are activated twice. The trigger effect activating twice is actually very threatening in this deck, especially with one of the biggest strengths of this deck is deck filtering. You're going to be deck filtering a lot, especially from the first skill, because you're already choosing 2 meteors from your deck and already putting them to the order zone, and let's not forget that the meteors are going to have additional skills as well. But another thing is the extra power and crit on its own, being a 28 kit and a crit on its own with double trigger, that actually gets nasty over time, especially the early game crit pressure that it hits on your opponent. And having double trigger on top of that, if you get a crit, that's 4 damage if your opponent no guards it. To this day, I actually find that actually pretty powerful. But it's mostly just the combination of the 2 skills together that actually makes this really good. And I still like the deck because of it, because of the meteorite throw, and just the way how it uses set orders as a cost. And so that's for the ride deck. For the main deck, you do run 3 more. Just for both persona riding, but more so for the first skill to set up the meteors, and also because of Masque. And before we go to the Masque unit, let's go to the main cards of the deck. So first off, the Needless Meteor Shower. Why is there more than 4? It's because you can run up to 16 in the deck, but I only run 7 because I feel like that's a good number, just because the amount of times that you can basically get this from deck, but mainly for the grade 1 ride line search, because 7 actually kind of usually gets you at least 1 or 2 meteors, so I want to be able to get this one as soon as possible for the fact that it's also grade 1, because you can set this on your grade 1 turn as well. But anyway, to the other skills, when you place it to the order zone, you can soul charge 1. That's how you get your 3 soul for your grade 2. But if you place it by the Vanguard's ability, aka your Nordlinger, you can also draw a card. The soul charge and the draw a card are optional. Most of the time you will do the draw the card, but the soul charge is sometimes. So I'm glad that's optional, because yes, this deck can deck out due to the amount of times that you can filter, and one of the ways you're filtering is by the soul charging. So that itself is pretty good. And now the third skill, where when it's put from the drop zone, from the order zone, choose one of your opponent's rear guards and retire it. Yes, and as you can tell from Nordlinger, choosing these and using these as cost to blow up your opponent's field is actually going to be very big. And the fact that you could choose up to 5 of these, and you can actually easily put 5, it's not going to be too hard to just blow up 5. So it is still a must run. You could technically run less copies. I would say the least amount you should run is 6. At most, maybe run up to 9, but I feel like 7's a good number. But I have tested out different ratio numbers. I always feel like I need that 7 copy, so that's why I run 7. And then we go to the other meteor, the big giant meteor of Falling Hell Hazard. So it's basically similar to the other one, where when you put it from the order zone to drop, you can retire one of your opponent's rear guards, but if you do this, you must bind it. The reason why is because when you use it as a cost for your Vanguard's ability, it is counted as 2 meteors. No, you do not retire 2, but you only retire 1, but the fact that it can count as 2 meteors means that you can lessen your meteor count, which is going to be very huge, that you could actually run more units in the main deck. So you just have to run 4 of these. It is still searchable through Nordlinger, but it's not going to be the main target of Nordlinger, because you want to basically use the draw skill for the grade 1, so you do still have incentive to use that. But the fact that this counts as 2 is very huge. So that's it for the main cards of the deck that you have to run. So now to the rest of the main deck of the units. We go to Nordlinger Masques, so you can only write it from one of its identities. And then this second skill is that you can remove its old identity to basically return 3 meteorite cards from your draw zone back to your hand. This sounds good on paper until you realize the fact that you can only play once per turn, which does kind of suck. And that does cause a bit of a problem with this card overall because of that. But with some new support, this has improved quite a bit. So it is still not too bad to run this as a finisher because of the last skill, where when this card attacks a Vanguard, you can counter blast 1, put any number of meteors from your order zone to the drop, and then for every 2 meteors, call a card from your hand to the rear guard. And if you put at least 4, double trigger. Now of course it still inherits the double trigger, but comparing this to the original, it lost its extra power and crit. That does kind of suck. So this is why I say this is more of a finisher card, hence why I'm only running 3, and the fact that you still want to ride the original Nordlinger just so you could get 2 more to the order zone. But the part where you can call 2 units from hand can sometimes kind of suck, because it is -2 from your hand, and the fact that you might be clogged up with a bunch of other different cards that are not units can also suck, and the fact that you're not getting extra power kind of sucks as well. But on the right turn, where you're basically persona riding, this could actually be a decent finisher, especially if your opponent's at 5 damage with double trigger. And having 5 attacks on a 5 damage turn can actually be much more helpful than the extra crit. So I still like to just use this as a finisher. As for the return the order card part, that is better on the late game anyway, so you kind of just use this as a late game card anyway. And then I run 2 a Mask of Hydrogram because it's a mass deck. You could run a 3rd copy if you wish, but 2 is a good enough number, especially with all the filtering. And then finally, the last grade 3, Gravidia Bocarito. This card is still very good, just for the fact that you can Soul Blast 1, which is not much of a cost in this deck with the amount of soul charging. Choose a meteor right from your drop zone and put it to the order zone. You're going to be soul charging meteors sometimes as well, so you can Soul Blast that out and just put it to the order zone, which is another key part about this card. But the other key part about this card is the amount of pressure it gets from the second skill, because during your turn, if your opponent's rearguard was retired this turn, plus 5k. If your opponent's rearguard was retired this turn, plus 5k. But if at least 3 were retired, crit plus 1. Considering that you're going to be throwing a bunch of meteors at your opponent, the likely chances of your opponent having retired rearguards is already very high. But having basically 3 rearguards, maybe not, but it just basically adds extra pressure against your opponent, especially rearguards with crits as well. There's nothing to complain about that. And also it resets the stuff in your order zone, so it's also another key part. And now for the grade 2 lineup. So first up, the new card, Gravilia Wilena. This is basically Combined Rusher for Gravidius, because when you put a set order to your order zone and your Vanguard's Nordlinger, and as long as you do not put the set order from the drop zone, so meaning from deck, from Nordlinger skill, or from hand, you can Energy Blast 3 to call this to rearguard. That is very helpful, especially with Nordlinger Mask. That is very helpful, especially with Nordlinger Mask, considering that Nordlinger Mask needs to call from hand, so it just kind of saves you some cards in hand. But the other part is that it gets us 5k power for every 2 meteors that you use. Considering that Mask and the original wants you to use at least 4 to 5, this could get at least 10k. Of course, during certain turns it might be just 5k, but the part just to be able to superior call this and being a big beater on its own, it's just very helpful. And the fact that it uses energy instead of counterblast. Deck does not use energy, as you can tell so far. So being basically one of the new main cards that uses energy is also a huge plus. Hence why I run this new one over more copies of Combined Rusher, which I originally ran 4. But you can run a 4 copy of this, but you're going to filter out a lot, and I do see this card quite often, so 3 is a good number. And speaking of Combined Rusher, I still run the 2 Combined Rushers just because sometimes you want to alternate costs with the Counterblast or the energy, because sometimes you will run out of energy. So just having an alternate cost of having Counterblast to Superior Call instead can be quite helpful. Basically, Superior calls itself if you put a card to your order zone with a Counterblast 1 and also plus 10k if it attacks a grade 3 unit. You have 2 set order cards in the order zone. So just basically does the same thing, but it's not Gravidia, so that can be a restriction sometimes, but so far there's no restriction for Gravidius. So that's it for the grade 2 lineup. Now for the grade 1 lineup, I run the Gravidia Madler. This card is actually better than I thought than originally, because it's mainly for the second skill, but the first skill is that Rearguard Guardian. If you have at least 3 or more meteor cards from your order zone and drop, plus 2k power and 5k shield. 10k boost, 10k shield, not too bad, but mainly for the second skill, where on act once per turn you can Energy Blast 3 to choose up to 2 meteor rights from your hand and put it to the order zone and draw a card. Considering that Nordlinger Masques is going to add a bunch to your hand, and even in some cases early game you're going to have a lot in your hand, just being able to just set those right off the bat is just very helpful, and it lets you draw on top of it, so it's not too bad. But usually it's mainly because of Nordlinger Masques. Nordlinger Masques returns 3 and you can only play 1, so just being able to activate the other 2 right off the bat, just set up Nordlinger Masques turn, is also very nice, because I have found myself in that situation where you don't have enough meteors in your order zone. So being able to just speed it up a little faster is just helpful. And finally, for PGs, because PGs. And then for trigger lineup, the OT, and yes, you do double the OT's power as well, and also the OT's power is gained beforehand, meaning that you're going to be in 200 million, and then you're going to double that again. So remember that one. And then of course, 8 crits, because of course, threat. 3 draws. Fronts don't really work too well in this deck, especially the fact that you need to draw your key pieces as soon as possible, so you do want to filter that. And finally, 4 heals. So that's it for this deck profile on my Nordlinger Masques deck. What do you guys think of it? What other cards would you recommend, and what other changes would you make? I just gave you my deck list, so go ahead and tell me yours. But overall, what do you guys think of it? Overall, I just think it's a fun deck. Still has some issues here and there. Of course, it's been outclassed by newer decks, but it was one of the best decks back in the day, and it was also very fun back in the day as well. But overall, it's just a fun deck with some new updates, and I say these updates that they recently gave to Nordlinger is actually pretty decent, because let's just say Nordlinger Masques wasn't really that great. But thanks to the new support, it actually made Nordlinger Masques a little better, and Gravidia overall a little better. So I just had to make a deck profile of it, and overall it has been working a lot better. But in that, there's really not much to say about this. And before I go, considering that Divine Season 3 is going to have a lot of returning characters, do you guys think we're going to see a new grade 3 Nordlinger for the Ride deck? Hopefully we do, because it's been one of those decks that kind of need a new update, even just for the main deck. So I just hope that we do get to see a new form of it. But in that, that's it for this, and see you next time.